I watched the HOA president's lips move, but all I could hear was the roar of the twin-engine Cessna passing overhead, rattling the windows of my lakeside property in rural Montana. Karen Grayson stood on my porch with her arms crossed, her face turning the color of an overripe tomato as she screamed something about noise violations and community standards. The irony wasn't lost on me. My name is Ethan Norwood, and I've lived on this 15-acre property outside of Kalispell, Montana, for the past 12 years. When I bought the land back in 2014, it came with something the real estate agent had glossed over during the sale: water rights and maintenance responsibility for a small earthen dam on the upstream edge of my property. The dam had been built in the 1960s by the original landowner, creating a modest reservoir that fed into Willow Creek, which wound through the valley and directly through Pine Ridge Estates, the housing development that had sprouted up 5 years ago about a mile downstream from my place. I'd maintained that dam religiously. Every spring, I'd inspect the spillway, clear debris from the overflow pipes, reinforce any erosion on the embankment, and keep the vegetation trimmed. It was hard work, costing me about $1,500 annually in materials and equipment rental, plus countless hours of labor. But I did it because I understood the responsibility that came with controlling water flow for an entire watershed. People downstream depended on steady water levels, and I took that seriously. The aircraft noise Karen was complaining about, that came from my Piper Cherokee, a single-engine plane I'd purchased 3 years ago and kept in a hangar at Glacier Park International Airport. I was a recreational pilot, and yes, my flight path home occasionally took me over Pine Ridge Estates. Occasionally. Maybe twice a month when weather permitted. "Are you even listening to me?" Karen shrieked, finally loud enough that I could hear her over the fading engine noise. That plane wasn't even mine, by the way. It was a commercial flight on approach to the airport. "I'm listening," I said calmly. "You're upset about aircraft noise." "Upset, upset." Her voice hit a pitch that probably bothered dogs in 3 counties. "Your constant flights are disrupting our entire community. People can't enjoy their backyard pools, children can't nap, property values are declining." I held up a hand. "Karen, I fly over that area maybe twice a month, always during permitted daytime hours, and I'm operating completely within FAA regulations. I'm also flying at legal altitudes. You can't regulate federal airspace with HOA bylaws." Her eyes narrowed into slits. "We'll see about that." The Pine Ridge Estates HOA board met last night, and we've drafted a cease and desist letter. You will stop these flights immediately, or we'll take legal action. I almost laughed. Almost. You're going to sue me for flying my own airplane in federally regulated airspace. We have rights. She snapped. The HOA protects property values and quality of life. Your hobby is incompatible with our community standards. "I don't live in your community," I pointed out. "I'm not part of your HOA. I own this land independently, and it predates your development by decades." Karen pulled out a folded document from her designer purse. "This is your official warning. Cease all aircraft operations that create noise pollution affecting Pine Ridge Estates, or face legal consequences. We're also prepared to file complaints with the FAA, the county, and anyone else who will listen." She thrust the paper at me. I didn't take it, so she let it flutter to the porch floor. Then she spun on her expensive heels and marched back to her white Mercedes SUV, throwing gravel as she peeled out of my driveway. I picked up the document and read through it. It was professionally printed on HOA letterhead, signed by Karen Grayson as president, along with board members Linda Patterson and Gary Miller. The language was aggressive and full of legal-sounding threats that wouldn't hold up for 5 seconds in actual court. They were demanding I cease all flights within a 2-mile radius of Pine Ridge Estates, pay for a noise impact study to the tune of $5,000, and issue a written apology to all affected residents. The whole thing was absurd. I crumpled it up and tossed it in my recycling bin. Over the next 2 weeks, I received 3 more letters, each more threatening than the last. The HOA claimed they'd contacted a lawyer who assured them they had a strong case based on nuisance laws. They threatened to put a lien on my property, which made no sense since they had no authority over my land. They even suggested they might contact my employer, though I was self-employed as a freelance software developer. So good luck with that. The 4th letter arrived on a Monday morning in late May. This one was different. It came via certified mail, which meant I had to sign for it at the post office. Inside was a lawsuit filing. Karen and the Pine Ridge Estates HOA were actually suing me for ongoing noise harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and diminishment of property values. They were seeking $50,000 in damages, plus an injunction preventing me from flying anywhere near their development. I sat in my truck in the post office parking lot, reading through the legal document with growing disbelief. The lawsuit was filed in Flathead County District Court. They'd actually hired an attorney, some firm out of Kalispell that apparently specialized in property disputes. That evening, I called my own lawyer, a guy named Robert Chen who'd helped me with my property purchase years ago. I scanned and emailed him the lawsuit. He called me back within an hour. "Ethan, this is one of the most frivolous lawsuits I've seen in 20 years of practice. So I can ignore it? Absolutely not. You need to respond and we need to file a motion to dismiss. But I'm 99% certain this will get thrown out. You can't regulate federal airspace with HOA rules or nuisance claims. The Supremacy Clause of the Constitution is pretty clear on this. How much is this going to cost me?" Robert sighed. "To defend, probably $5,000 to $7,000 in legal fees, maybe more if they drag it out. I can file for you to recover costs if their suit is deemed frivolous, but that's not guaranteed." I thanked him and hung up. $5,000 to $7,000 to defend myself against a baseless lawsuit, all because I flew my own airplane a couple times a month. The injustice of it burned in my gut. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the dam. I'd inspected it 2 weeks ago, right before Karen's first visit. The spring runoff had been heavy this year, and I'd spent an entire weekend clearing the spillway and reinforcing a section of the embankment that was showing minor erosion. It was hard, dirty work that I'd done without complaint because it was my responsibility. But was it really? I got up at 2 in the morning and dug through my filing cabinet until I found my property deed and the original disclosure documents from when I purchased the land. I read through every page carefully, something I should have done more thoroughly 12 years ago. The dam was on my property, yes. But the actual legal obligation to maintain it was murky. The original owner had built it with Army Corps of Engineers approval back in the 1960s, but that approval had come with conditions. The dam had to be maintained by the property owner or designee to ensure it didn't pose a flooding risk to downstream properties. I researched Montana state law regarding private dams. What I found was interesting. Small dams like mine, classified as low-hazard structures, had minimal state oversight. The owner was expected to maintain them, but there was no enforcement mechanism unless someone complained or unless the dam was demonstrably unsafe. Even then, the state would typically just order the dam removed or require the owner to make specific repairs. More importantly, I found information about Montana's adverse possession and prescriptive easement laws. The homeowners downstream had no legal right to demand I maintain that dam, unless they could prove they had a property interest in it, or unless they could demonstrate I was legally obligated to them specifically. Pine Ridge Estates had been built knowing my dam existed upstream. They'd done their own environmental impact studies, which I'd actually been asked to provide information for back in 2019. Those studies had noted the dam and its reservoir as existing water features that would benefit the development by providing consistent water flow to Willow Creek, which ran through their community as a scenic amenity. Several lots backed right up to the creek, marketed as waterfront properties that commanded premium prices. A dark thought crept into my mind. If I was going to be sued for thousands of dollars over legally flying my own airplane, why was I spending my own time and money maintaining infrastructure that primarily benefited the same people suing me? I knew the answer, of course. Because dam failure could cause property damage or even endanger lives. Because it was the right thing to do. Because I was a responsible adult who understood consequences. But the thought wouldn't leave me alone. The next morning, I called the Montana Department of Natural Resources and Conservation, which oversees dam safety. I spoke with an inspector named Thomas Wright. I own a small earthen dam on my property, I explained. I've been maintaining it for years, but I'm being sued by downstream property owners over an unrelated issue. I'm wondering what my legal obligations are regarding the dam. Thomas asked for my property details and looked up the dam in their system. Okay, I see it. Built in 1964, classified as low hazard. Last inspection was, looks like never. We don't typically inspect low hazard dams unless there's a complaint. What are my maintenance obligations, legally? You're expected to keep it in reasonable condition so it doesn't pose an imminent threat. If it fails and causes damage, you could be liable. But the state doesn't mandate specific maintenance schedules for low-hazard dams. If you wanted to stop maintaining it, you could. If it deteriorated to the point of being unsafe, we'd eventually require you to either fix it or remove it. And if I chose to remove it, that's your right as the property owner, assuming you follow proper procedures. You'd need to file a permit with us and with the Army Corps. Process takes about 6 months. The reservoir would drain and the creek would return to its natural flow rate. I thanked him and hung up. An idea was forming, but I needed more information. I spent the rest of the week researching and consulting with Robert about the implications. What I learned was this: the dam was mine to do with as I pleased within legal bounds. If I chose to neglect its maintenance or even remove it entirely, that was my prerogative. The downstream property owners had no legal mechanism to force me to maintain it unless they could prove specific harm and negligence. The lawsuit against me was scheduled for a preliminary hearing in 3 weeks. In the meantime, the HOA escalated their campaign. Karen sent another certified letter informing me that they'd filed a complaint with the FAA about my unsafe flying practices. The FAA would investigate, of course, find nothing wrong, and dismiss it. But it was harassing nonetheless. Then she filed a complaint with the county zoning board, claiming my property was being used as a commercial airfield without proper permits. That was completely false. I didn't even have a landing strip on my property, but it triggered an inspection that cost me a day of work and added stress I didn't need. The harassment continued. Someone filed an anonymous report with Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks claiming I was polluting the reservoir with chemicals. Another inspection, another day wasted, Another false claim. I knew it was Karen and her cronies trying to bury me in bureaucratic hassles. That's when I made my decision. I was done maintaining their dam. It was early June when I stopped. The spring runoff was tapering off, but there was still significant water flow. Normally, this was when I do my mid-season maintenance check, clearing any accumulated debris and checking for developing problems. Instead, I did nothing. I did call the Montana DNRC back and informed them of my decision. I'm ceasing all maintenance on the dam on my property. I wanted to make that official so there's a record. Thomas Wright sounded surprised. Any particular reason? Personal decision. The downstream property owners are suing me over an unrelated matter. I see no reason to continue spending my time and money maintaining infrastructure that primarily benefits them. That's your right, Thomas said slowly. We'll make a note in our files. If the dam's condition deteriorates to the point of being a safety concern, we'll be in touch. Understood. I also documented everything. I took photos of the dam's current condition, noting that it was structurally sound as of that day. I wanted a clear record that I wasn't abandoning a failing structure. I was simply ceasing voluntary maintenance of a functional one. For the first few weeks, nothing happened. The dam continued to function as it always had, holding back the reservoir and feeding water through its spillway into Willow Creek. I didn't touch it, didn't clear anything, didn't inspect it. I simply left it alone. The preliminary hearing for the lawsuit arrived in late June. Robert and I appeared before Judge Patricia Morrison in Flathead County District Court. Karen was there with her attorney, a slick-looking guy named David Hutchins, who wore a suit that probably cost more than my airplane. Hutchins presented his case, arguing that my flights constituted an ongoing nuisance that was harming his client's quality of life and property values. He had charts, graphs, and even testimony from 3 Pine Ridge residents about how disturbing my airplane noise was. Then Robert stood up. Your Honor, this entire lawsuit is preempted by federal law. The Federal Aviation Administration has exclusive sovereignty over navigable airspace, as established by the Federal Aviation Act of 1958 and reaffirmed in multiple Supreme Court decisions. My client is operating legally within FAA regulations. The HOA has no authority to regulate or restrict his activities. Judge Morrison looked at Hutchins. Counselor, how do you respond to the preemption argument? Hutchins tried to pivot to nuisance law, arguing that excessive noise could still constitute a nuisance regardless of federal regulations. Robert countered that the flights occurred twice monthly, during daytime hours at legal altitudes, and in full compliance with all applicable laws. The hearing lasted 40 minutes. Judge Morrison took it under advisement but seemed skeptical of the HOA's case. As we left the courtroom, Karen cornered me in the hallway. You think you're so smart, she hissed. You think you can just do whatever you want because of some technicality. It's not a technicality, Karen, it's the law. We'll make your life hell, she promised. Every single flight we'll file a complaint. Every single time you step out of line even a little bit, we'll be there. You're going to regret messing with us. I looked her dead in the eye. I think you're going to regret starting this. She looked confused, but I didn't elaborate. I just walked away. July brought hot weather and the first signs of trouble at the dam. A beaver had moved into the area, something that happened occasionally. Normally, I discourage the beaver from building near the dam structures because their construction could interfere with the spillway or create new seepage points. This time, I did nothing. The beaver built an impressive lodge right against the primary spillway. Within 2 weeks, it had partially blocked the main overflow channel. Water started backing up in the reservoir, raising the level about 8 inches above normal. Still well within safe limits, but not ideal. I documented it with photos but took no action. In early August, we got an unusual storm system that dumped 3 inches of rain over 2 days. Not catastrophic, but enough to significantly increase the reservoir level. The water rose to within a foot of the emergency spillway, a secondary overflow designed to handle extreme conditions. The beaver dam at the primary spillway was now completely blocking that channel. All the water was being forced through a narrow gap and over the beaver's construction, creating turbulence that was starting to erode the dam's downstream face. My phone rang. It was Thomas Wright from the DNRC. "Mr. Norwood, we've received a report about your dam. Apparently, the reservoir level is unusually high and there's some erosion occurring. Can you give me an update?" "There's a beaver dam blocking the primary spillway," I said calmly. "It's causing backup and some erosion on the downstream face. The structure is still intact, but it's not ideal. Are you planning to address it?" "No. As I informed you in June, I'm no longer maintaining the dam." There was a long pause. "Mr. Norwood, if the dam is developing a safety issue, you could be held liable for any damage if it fails." "I understand. The dam was in good condition when I ceased maintenance. What's happening now is natural deterioration and wildlife activity. If you believe it's reached the point of being a safety concern, you're welcome to inspect it and issue whatever orders you feel are appropriate." Another pause. "I'll schedule an inspection for next week." "That's fine. I'll be available." I hung up knowing I was playing with fire. But I was angry, angrier than I'd been in years. Karen and her HOA had pushed and pushed, filing false complaints, harassing me with bureaucratic nonsense and suing me for exercising my legal rights. They wanted to make my life difficult? Fine. Two could play that game. Thomas Wright showed up the following Tuesday with another inspector. They spent 2 hours examining the dam, taking measurements and documenting the beaver activity and erosion. Afterward, Thomas approached me. "The dam is still structurally sound, but the blockage at the spillway is a problem. You need to clear it and repair the erosion on the downstream face." "I respectfully decline," I said. His expression hardened. "Mr. Norwood, I can issue an official order requiring you to make repairs. Then do it, and I'll comply with whatever legal timeline is specified in that order." He shook his head. "You're playing a dangerous game. That dam fails and people could get hurt. The people downstream are currently suing me and have filed multiple false reports trying to interfere with my life. I'm not inclined to spend my time and money protecting their property anymore." Thomas looked at me for a long moment. "I'll have the order drafted. You'll have 30 days to comply once it's issued." "I'll follow whatever legal process is required." He left, and I knew the clock was ticking. The DNRC order would arrive in a week or two, giving me 30 days to make repairs. But a lot could happen in that time. The lawsuit decision came down in mid-August. Judge Morrison granted Roberts' motion to dismiss, ruling that the HOA's claims were preempted by federal aviation law. She also awarded me attorney's fees, ordering the HOA to pay the $6,200 I'd spent defending myself. Karen was furious. She immediately filed an appeal, which would take months to work through the system and had virtually no chance of success. But it meant the harassment would continue. The dam situation continued to deteriorate. The beaver had actually expanded its construction, and the August heat combined with increased irrigation withdrawals downstream meant the reservoir was being pushed harder. Water was now regularly spilling over the emergency spillway, which wasn't designed for continuous use. The erosion on the downstream face was getting worse. I could see it from my back deck, a growing scar in the earthen embankment where fast-moving water was eating away the soil. Still not critical, but trending in a bad direction. The DNRC order arrived on August 20th. I had until September 19th to clear the spillway and repair the erosion. The order specified that failure to comply could result in fines of up to $1,000 per day and potential criminal charges if the dam failed and caused damage. I read the order carefully. September 19th. 5 weeks away. I filed the order in my cabinet and went about my business. Karen, meanwhile, had ramped up her campaign. She'd organized a community action committee focused on getting my pilot's license revoked. She'd contacted local news stations, though none were interested in her story. She'd even shown up at the Kalispell City Council meeting to complain about me, despite the fact that neither my property nor Pine Ridge Estates were within city limits. I flew my Piper Cherokee on September 3rd, a beautiful Sunday afternoon flight up toward Glacier National Park. My route home took me over Pine Ridge Estates, as it often did. I was at 3,500 feet, well above the minimum altitude, and the flight was smooth and uneventful. By the time I landed, Karen had already left 3 voicemails threatening new legal action. September brought early fall weather. We had several storms roll through, typical for Montana at that time of year. Each storm brought rain, and each rain event raised the reservoir level a bit more. The Beaver Dam at the spillway was now a massive structure, completely blocking the original overflow channel. The Beaver seemed quite happy with its work. I might have admired its engineering if the situation weren't so serious. The erosion on the downstream face had progressed significantly. What had started as a small gully was now a channel about 3 feet deep and 10 feet long, cutting into the embankment. Water was seeping through the dam face in several places, creating wet spots and minor piping issues. September 19th came and went. I did not make the required repairs. Thomas Wright called me on September 20th. "Mr. Norwood, you've missed the deadline for the repairs. I'm aware. Are you refusing to comply with the order? I'm prioritizing other matters. I'll get to it when I can. That's not acceptable. I'm going to have to refer this for enforcement action. You could face significant fines." "That's your prerogative." He hung up, frustrated. I knew what I was doing was reckless, possibly illegal, but I'd reached a point where I simply didn't care anymore. Karen and her HOA had pushed me beyond reason. The next big storm hit on September 25th. It was a significant system, dropping nearly 4 inches of rain over 3 days. The reservoir level rose to the highest I'd ever seen it. Water was pouring over the emergency spillway in a torrent, and the entire dam structure was under more stress than it was designed to handle. On the evening of September 27th, I stood on my back deck, watching the situation unfold. The sun was setting, casting orange light across the swollen reservoir. The roar of water over the spillway was loud enough to hear from my house. I knew what was coming. The dam was going to fail, probably within the next few days if we got any more rain. The question was whether I should do something about it or let nature take its course. My phone rang. It was Robert. "Ethan, I heard the DNRC is pursuing enforcement action. This is serious. You need to make those repairs." "I know." "Then why aren't you?" "Because I'm tired, Robert. I'm tired of being sued for no reason. I'm tired of false complaints and harassment. I'm tired of spending my own time and money to protect people who are actively trying to harm me." "I understand that, but if that dam fails and causes damage, you're looking at liability that could bankrupt you. Not to mention potential criminal charges. Would they really prosecute me for not maintaining my own dam on my own property? If people get hurt, absolutely. And even if no one's injured, the property damage alone could be massive. You'd be sued into oblivion. I was silent for a long moment. What if I warned them? What? What if I officially notified Pine Ridge Estates that the dam was in poor condition and might fail? Wouldn't that limit my liability? Robert thought about it. Possibly. If you provide adequate warning and they choose not to take protective measures, that could be a defense. But Ethan, is this really the road you want to go down? I'm already on it. That night, I drafted a letter. I made it formal and clear. To the Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. This letter serves as official notice that the earthen dam on my property at 4750 Willow Creek Road is currently in poor condition due to beaver activity and storm damage. The dam may fail in the near future, which could result in flooding along Willow Creek. I recommend that all properties adjacent to the creek take appropriate precautions, including moving valuable items to higher ground and considering temporary evacuation if weather conditions worsen. This situation has developed due to my decision to cease voluntary maintenance of the dam, a decision I am legally entitled to make as the property owner. I sent copies via certified mail to Karen Grayson as HOA president, to the Flathead County Emergency Management Office, and to the Montana DNRC. I documented everything with photos and videos of the dam's current condition. The response was immediate and explosive. Karen called me within hours of receiving the letter, her voice shaking with rage. "Are you threatening to flood our community? I'm warning you that my dam may fail. Big difference. This is criminal. You're deliberately sabotaging that dam." I've done nothing to the dam except stop maintaining it. Everything that's happened is natural deterioration and wildlife activity. We'll sue you for everything you have. You're already suing me, Karen. Get in line. She hung up, and I knew I'd crossed a point of no return. The County Emergency Management Office took the warning seriously. They sent someone out to inspect the dam the next day. The inspector, a middle-aged man named Carl Davis, looked grim after his examination. "This could go at any time," he said. "We need to issue a flood warning for the downstream area." "That's probably wise," I agreed. "Why aren't you fixing this?" "That's between me and the DNRC." Carl shook his head. "People's homes are at risk. Then they should take appropriate precautions. I've given them fair warning." The county issued a flood watch for properties along Willow Creek. Local news actually picked up the story, describing it as a potential dam failure situation. Karen gave an interview on the evening news, describing me as a dangerous lunatic who was holding the community hostage. I declined to comment to the media. October arrived with more storms. The first week brought scattered showers, nothing major but enough to keep the reservoir at critical levels. The dam was showing serious stress now. The erosion channel on the downstream face was over 5 feet deep, cutting well into the core of the embankment. Water was pouring through several seepage points. On October 7th, we got another significant storm. 2 inches of rain fell overnight, and that was all it took. I woke at 6 in the morning to a sound like thunder. Rushing to my back deck, I saw the dam breaching. The erosion channel had given way catastrophically, and water was exploding through the gap. As I watched, the breach widened rapidly, the force of the water tearing away massive chunks of the embankment. Within 20 minutes, the entire center section of the dam collapsed. The reservoir drained in a massive surge, sending millions of gallons of water roaring down Willow Creek. I immediately called 911 to report the failure, then grabbed my phone and started documenting everything with video. The wall of water hit Pine Ridge Estates about 15 minutes later. I couldn't see it from my property, but I learned the details later from news reports and investigation documents. The flood surge was about 6 feet high when it reached the development. Most homes had enough elevation to avoid structural damage to the houses themselves, but the backyards, landscaping, and anything near the creek were devastated. 6 houses that backed directly onto the creek suffered basement flooding. The community's decorative bridges were swept away. The walking trail along the creek was completely destroyed, buried under several feet of mud and debris. The surge continued downstream for about 2 miles before dissipating into the wider valley. A county road was washed out. Several agricultural fields were flooded. Some livestock fencing was destroyed. Amazingly, no one was hurt. The flood watch had given people time to move valuables and avoid the creek area. But the property damage was extensive, estimated at over $2 million across all affected properties. Within hours, my property was swarming with officials. County Emergency Management, the Sheriff's Office, the DNRC, and eventually the Army Corps of Engineers all sent representatives. I cooperated fully, providing access to my property and documentation of everything that had led to the dam failure. Thomas Wright from the DNRC looked like he wanted to strangle me. "You let this happen deliberately." I ceased maintaining the dam and provided adequate warning when it became unstable. Everything I did was within my legal rights. That's for prosecutors to decide. The sheriff's deputies questioned me for over an hour. I explained the entire situation. The HOA's harassment, the frivolous lawsuit, my decision to stop voluntary maintenance, and the warnings I'd provided when the dam's condition deteriorated. "Did you take any action to deliberately cause the dam to fail?" the lead deputy asked. "No. I simply stopped maintaining it. The failure was caused by beaver activity, storm damage, and the dam's age. But you knew it would fail." "I suspected it might. That's why I issued warnings." They confiscated my documentation, including all the photos and videos I'd taken. I provided everything willingly, knowing it actually supported my position. The news media descended like locusts. My property was visible from the county road, and TV crews set up on the shoulder, filming the remnants of the failed dam. Karen gave multiple interviews, calling for my arrest and describing me as a domestic terrorist who deliberately flooded the community. I still declined to comment publicly, on advice from Robert. The next 2 weeks were a blur of investigations and legal activity. The DNRC issued a massive fine, $45,000 for failing to maintain the dam and comply with their repair order. The county filed charges for reckless endangerment, a misdemeanor that could carry jail time. And of course, the lawsuit started. Karen and 13 other Pine Ridge residents filed a civil suit seeking damages for the flooding. Their complaint alleged negligence, willful misconduct, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. But then things started to get interesting in ways Karen hadn't anticipated. The Army Corps of Engineers completed their investigation first. Their report concluded that the dam had been poorly maintained but not deliberately sabotaged, and that adequate warning was provided to downstream property owners. They also noted that the dam owner was under no contractual or regulatory obligation to maintain the structure for the benefit of downstream properties. The DNRC's own investigation reached similar conclusions. While they upheld the fine for failing to comply with their repair order, they found no evidence of deliberate sabotage or criminal intent. More importantly, Robert started digging into Pine Ridge Estates history. What he found was explosive. The development's environmental impact study from 2019 had specifically identified my dam as an existing structure that would provide flow regulation and water management benefits. The development had been designed around the assumption that my dam would continue operating, with several lots marketed as premium creekfront properties based on the steady water flow my reservoir provided. In other words, Pine Ridge Estates had been built with the explicit knowledge and expectation that they were dependent on my dam, but no one had ever approached me about formalizing any agreement or compensating me for the maintenance costs. Robert filed a counterclaim against the HOA, arguing that they had been unjustly enriched by my voluntary maintenance of the dam for years, that they had no legal standing to sue me when I ceased that voluntary service, and that their original harassment and frivolous lawsuit had directly led to the situation. The county prosecutor, after reviewing all the evidence, made a decision that shocked everyone. She dropped the reckless endangerment charge, but filed charges against Karen Grayson personally for filing false reports and abuse of process. The multiple fake complaints Karen had filed with various agencies constituted a pattern of harassment that met the threshold for criminal charges. Karen was arrested on October 28th. The image of her being led from her home in handcuffs made the local news and went viral on social media. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. Instead of being the villain who'd flooded a neighborhood, I was now being portrayed as the victim of HOA harassment who'd been pushed to the breaking point. The civil lawsuit against me became complicated. Karen's arrest undermined the HOA's credibility, and Robert's counterclaim forced them to defend their own actions. Depositions revealed that Karen had been obsessed with me, keeping logs of my airplane flights and coordinating the harassment campaign through HOA board meetings. In December, I received a settlement offer. The HOA would drop their suit against me and pay my legal fees, approximately $15,000 at that point, in exchange for me dropping my counterclaim and agreeing not to pursue further action against them. I countered. They would drop their suit, pay my legal fees, pay the $45,000 DNRC fine that I'd been assessed, provide a written apology to be posted on the HOA website and mailed to all residents, and revoke Karen Grayson's membership on the HOA board. In exchange, I dropped my counterclaim and released them from further liability. They accepted. Karen's criminal case proceeded separately. She pleaded guilty to 2 counts of filing false reports in exchange for probation and community service. She was also ordered to stay away from me and my property. The HOA board voted to remove her as president and permanently bar her from leadership positions. The environmental cleanup from the flood took months. Insurance covered most of the damage to individual properties. The county repaired the washed-out road. I worked with the Army Corps to officially decommission the dam site, removing the remaining structure and allowing the creek to return to its natural state. In February, I received a formal letter from the new Pine Ridge Estates HOA president, a reasonable guy named Michael Torres. The letter apologized for the harassment I'd endured and acknowledged that the community had benefited from my maintenance of the dam for years without proper recognition or compensation. It included a check for $5,000 as a goodwill gesture and an invitation to a community dinner where they wanted to publicly acknowledge what had happened. I declined the dinner but kept the check. By spring, things had largely returned to normal. My property was quieter without the reservoir, the land where the dam had been slowly returning to natural vegetation. I still flew my Piper Cherokee whenever I wanted, and no one complained anymore. I won't pretend I'm proud of what I did. Letting that dam fail, even with warnings, was dangerous and could have ended much worse. People could have been hurt or killed, and I would have had to live with that forever. but I also won't say I regret it. Karen and her HOA pushed me to a breaking point, using the legal system and government agencies as weapons to harass me for exercising my basic rights. They made a calculated decision that they could bully me into compliance, and they were wrong. The whole situation taught me something about how quickly reasonable people can become unreasonable when they feel they have institutional power behind them. HOA, at their best, can help maintain community standards and property values. At their worst, they become petty fiefdoms where people like Karen can indulge their need for control without accountability. I still live on my property outside Kalispell. I still fly my airplane. Willow Creek still runs through the valley, now at its natural flow rate without any dam regulation. Pine Ridge Estates still exists downstream, though I hear property values took a hit after the flood and the publicity around Karen's arrest. Sometimes I drive past the development and see people walking along the rebuilt trail by the creek. I wonder if they know the full story of what happened, or if they just think it was a natural disaster, an unfortunate accident of geography and weather. I know the truth. It was a disaster, but there was nothing natural about it. It was the entirely predictable result of harassment, spite, and the breakdown of basic human decency. Karen wanted to teach me a lesson about respecting community standards. Instead, she learned a much harder lesson about consequences. The legal battles are finally over. The cleanup is complete. Life goes on, but I think everyone involved learned something from the experience. For me, it was a reminder that every action has consequences, and sometimes standing up for your rights means accepting that you might hurt people in the process, even if they started the fight. For Karen and the Pine Ridge Estates HOA, I hope they learned that institutional power doesn't give you the right to bully people, and that sometimes the person you're harassing has more power than you realized. My dam regulated water that flowed through their community. When they pushed me hard enough, they found out what life was like without that regulation. I could have been the bigger person. I could have continued maintaining the dam despite the harassment, because it was the right thing to do. Maybe that would have made me a better person, more noble, more ethical, but I'm not sure I care anymore. Sometimes being the bigger person just means letting people walk all over you while you smile and take it. Sometimes you have to push back, even if the method isn't pretty. The dam is gone now. The lawsuit is settled. Karen has a criminal record and a reputation in tatters, and I still fly my airplane whenever I want, completely legally, without anyone threatening me. In the end, maybe that's justice. Not the clean, satisfying kind you see in movies, but the messy, complicated, real-world kind where nobody's entirely right and nobody wins cleanly. I think about that morning when I watched the dam breach, the water exploding through the embankment in a roar of brown fury. Part of me knew I should have prevented it, should have fixed the problems before they reached that point. But another part of me felt a grim satisfaction, watching the physical manifestation of consequences flow downstream toward the people who'd pushed me there. That probably makes me a bad person. I can live with that. What I couldn't live with was being harassed and bullied while continuing to provide free services to my tormentors. Some prices are too high, even for doing the right thing. Montana winters are beautiful from the air. I took the Cherokee up just last week, flying north toward the Canadian border with the snow-covered peaks of Glacier National Park gleaming in the afternoon sun. My route took me over where Pine Ridge Estates sits in the valley, though you can barely see it from 4,000 feet. I wondered briefly if anyone down there looked up and recognized my plane. I wondered if they understood that the low rumble of my engine wasn't a threat or a nuisance, just a man exercising his freedom in the one place where HOA rules and petty tyrants can't reach. The radio crackled with routine traffic from Kalispell Tower. The engine hummed smoothly. The late afternoon light turned everything gold and perfect. I banked west toward home, toward my quiet property where a creek now runs unobstructed through land that's truly mine. No dam, no obligations, no Karen Grayson making my life hell over things that were never her business to begin with. Sometimes I miss the reservoir, the peaceful water reflecting the mountains on calm mornings. But I don't miss the responsibility, and I definitely don't miss the false sense of obligation to people who saw my labor as something they were entitled to, while treating me as a problem to be eliminated. The settlement money paid off all my legal fees and then some. The DNRC fine was covered by the HOA as part of our agreement. I came out of the whole mess financially better off than when it started, which feels like cosmic justice of a sort. Karen's legal troubles ended with probation, but her social standing in the community never recovered. Last I heard, she and her husband were considering moving to Missoula to escape the stigma. The other HOA board members who'd supported her campaign against me quietly resigned. The new board has a reputation for being much more reasonable, focused on actual community issues instead of manufacturing problems. Pine Ridge Estates still functions, still has its rules and regulations and community standards. But I hear they're much more careful now about who they antagonize and why. Word spreads in small communities, and the story of what happened became a cautionary tale about HOA overreach. I landed the Cherokee as the sun touched the western peaks, the wheels chirping on the runway at Glacier Park International. Another perfect flight, another exercise of the freedom that Karen had tried so hard to take from me. As I tied down the plane and secured it for the night, I thought about sending her a postcard. Wish you were here with a picture of my airplane. But that would be petty, and besides, the restraining order meant she wasn't supposed to receive any contact from me. Instead, I just drove home, taking the long route past Pine Ridge Estates. The late October evening was cool and clear. Lights were coming on in the houses. I could see the rebuilt walking trail along Willow Creek, new and neat and carefully engineered to withstand future floods. They'd learned their lesson about depending on things they didn't control. So had I. My property was dark and quiet when I arrived. No reservoir, no dam, no responsibilities to people who hated me. Just 15 acres of Montana land, a house I'd built with my own hands, and the freedom to live my life without interference from petty tyrants with too much time and too little sense. I poured myself a bourbon and stood on the back deck, looking at the stars emerging in the darkening sky. Tomorrow I'd go into Kalispell to pick up some supplies. Next week I had a flying trip planned up to the Canadian border. Life was good, better than it had been in years, no regrets. Well, maybe a few, but nothing I couldn't live with. The sound of the creek babbling past my property was softer now without the reservoir feeding it, more natural. It sounded like freedom. And somewhere downstream, in their carefully managed community with their rules and regulations, the people of Pine Ridge Estates were learning to live with the consequences of the war they'd started. Justice isn't always pretty. But sometimes it flows downhill like water, finding its level, sweeping away the debris of arrogance and spite. I raised my glass to the darkness, to the mountains, to the vast Montana sky, to freedom, to consequences, to standing your ground even when everyone says you're wrong. The bourbon was smooth and warm. The night was perfect, and for the first time in over a year I felt completely at peace.